Hi everyone, welcome to Friday Forum Live. My name's Echo McGlynn and this is Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we are joined by our sound engineering instructor Ganesh Singaram to look at creating depth in your mixes. So today is all about creating depth in your mixes. And if you want to learn more mixing techniques and all that good stuff, make sure you check out our courses at pointblanklondon.com. And remember, we are completely live today, so get your questions in the chat for Ganesh and we'll get to them throughout the broadcast. Welcome, Ganesh. Another FFL, another Friday, here we are.
Another one.
How's it going?
It's going good.
You just got back from LA,
yeah,
jet setting, as usual.
Came back yesterday at 1 and tried to stay awake and
the classic,
here I am.
Yeah. Well done, you made it.
I'm soldiering on. Well, if I fall asleep halfway through
yeah, that's why.
Excuse me.
So depth, I mean, depth is a bit of a vague term. What do we mean when we talk about depth in music production?
I think this is the thing, like a lot of mixes that you hear, maybe people are doing it at home as well. It's just sometimes the mixes sound very two-dimensional, like it's just here, and there's nothing sort of behind the speakers in a way. So it's sort of accessing that point, and sort of playing on people's like perception of sound to sort of create depth in your mixes. I think the main thing is we only have two speakers, left and right. And panning wise, we've got, left, center, right, but we don't have a pan pot to go, backwards and forwards. Yeah. So we need to try to think of ways of sort of accessing that and playing on people's perception of sound to push things backwards and forwards in the mix.
Yeah. So it is an illusionary thing. It's not actually being moved back and forward. Yeah.
It is, right. So the thing is, I can't physically pan something backwards, but I can do certain things to trick the listener into making them feel like it's, in the background.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you have your mixes and they're all like sort of 2D, you're not sort of exciting the listener in a way where you go, oh wow, there's like a lot of depth behind that, or there's a lot of feel behind that. So you need to sort of start getting into your mixes and start pushing those boundaries from just, up here to there. So certain things can be more upfront. In usual, commercially released songs, things in the center and really up front are like kick, snare, bass, and vocal, for example. Your main core elements are always dead center and really up front. And then you got all this other space to mess around with. So it's about experimenting and sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit more. It's sort of the idea, and hopefully today, when we go through all the steps and stuff like that, it's more about me trying to give you sort of incentives or ideas to try different things. I'll just play some examples and mess around with a few different things, but it's not more about me mixing this track and creating depth. It's about me hopefully giving you the tools to do it with your mixer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be very example specific with certain things, and then we'll see how that goes.
Cool. So
that's the idea. We'll see how it all goes.
Do you want to introduce this track then?
So this is a song that we recorded for sound engineering here at Point Blank with some students. So it's just a cover of a song from Major Lazar called Powerful. Maybe I'll just play you up until a little bit and then we'll just take it in from there. Sort of get the idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a few random things today, so
good.
Bear with me. We only got a short period of time. I'm going to sort of try to cram in as much information as possible. But let me start off with my diagram because I think I'm a really good drawer. But someone pointed out this looks like a Wi-Fi thing, but it probably is a Wi-Fi sort of thing. So this is sort of creating a little bit of a visual aspect for mixing. So because we're in London, we've got different zones here, so I just zoned it up from 1 to 6. But at the front, we're sort of dealing with things that will be a lot more up front in the mix, which will be, as I said, kick, snare, vocals and bass. And then you got the whole aspect behind that you can sort of trigger stuff into. You know, this is the depth of field that we're talking about. So this is really upfront and present, and then you got all this sort of playgrounds to mess around with. So hopefully, with the stuff I show you today, you can sort of access the different points and where you want to place things. I think visually, you know, when I mix, I sort of go to these things. I want to put something here, I want to put something there. I'm going to put something in zone 3 there, or 4 here, or 6, and so forth. So I've got like a visual guide of where I want to go. And then I try using the tricks that I've learned along the way from all these cool people to sort of put it in practice and go for it. That's the idea. So I guess we'll just get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go down.
Yeah. We'll make that available for download.
Yeah. Just sign it and date it. I'm going to show you some examples, and I'm just going to start with the kick drum because I think it's a really easy way to grasp what I'm trying to say. The first thing I'm going to do is mess around with EQ and how EQ can actually make you feel, you know, a lot more closer to something or a lot further away from something as well. So this is the random stuff I'm going to be doing as well. Do you mind scooting a little bit?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, so
I'm moving away.
we'll see how this works, but do you mind dropping my mic, please? Might not work. We'll see. So when I'm talking over here and I'm walking closer to you, the only thing that you've really noticed that's different is obviously level and the frequency content of what I'm talking about. So hopefully, I don't know how much you can hear it, but hopefully
I have to take your word for it, yeah.
Yeah, so if I walk closer to you, for example, what you notice is the low end is a lot more apparent. My top end is a little bit more detailed as well. And then my level obviously goes up. So the thing is, even if you close your eyes, by me walking closer and further away from you, your ears can decipher how close and far I am. So you sort of use that to your advantage in mixing.
Yeah.
I don't know, I hope you can
Yeah.
hear that. Yeah, that's all good, thanks. So it's almost like, you know, when you go to a club, for example, and you're sort of hanging out outside, you can hear that the music's playing from within the club, but you know it's sort of space away from you. So you can almost do that when you mix. So main things that sort of push things backwards and forwards in the mix is the low end and top end. So if you mess around with that, you can almost push things backwards and forwards in the mix.
Without even, before you even begin to touch spatial effects.
Before
Very
even,
EQ,
effects. So you're using the psychology of how people perceive sound to trick them into feeling things backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
As I said, I'll just do it with the kick because it's a good example and everyone can sort of hear it. So hopefully everyone feels that really upfront and present. And then what I'll do, just by using some filters, is push this backwards and forwards in the mix. Feels like it goes all the way to the background. I know level is a big thing, so I'm not really focusing on that. I'm more focusing on frequency content. So the kick drum going, bye.
Yeah.
And then let me bring it back in. Told you it'd be random today.
Yeah.
So.
Your jet lag is fine.
Yeah. Now that's really more upfront and present. So I'll go back up again just so you can feel it. So if we were doing this and, you know, you close your eyes, for example, and you're just listening to it, you know, it's not a visual thing, it's your perception of sound. So you know that that thing's going more in the background. You wouldn't necessarily do this with the kick drum because, as I said, it's like really upfront and present, but I'm just using it to hopefully demonstrate this a lot more easier. But, you know, if you got guitars or synths and stuff like that that you want to sort of push in the background, before you even touch, you know, level, compressors, effects and stuff like that, just by you using an EQ can push things
The old chart.
backwards and forwards again. So maybe, yeah, let's try this. So this is zone 1 now at the top. And then watch, I'll push it back into different zones. zone 3, 4. And then coming back in, drawing it back to zone 1. Just by me doing that, you know, changes where you think that sound is. So, you know, you could try this on a lot of different things just to push it backwards and forwards. You know, so hopefully, you know, the stuff that I'm talking about will sort of just inspire you to try different things on your mixes and see how it goes. I mean, some of them might not work. Some of them you might have to use a few different tricks to sort of get it there. But as long as you know the tools that you have at your disposal, it's the main thing. So that's one example. Another example is the top end content. So me talking closer to you, you'll hear a lot more of my top end detail. Me moving further away, it's the same thing. It's like you can actually feel me going away because of the top end drops as well. Obviously besides level, but we're talking more frequency content. So now let's do it the reverse way, where we take off the top end. It already feels a lot more distant. Like you're standing in front of that club. That feels a lot more distant.
Yeah.
But it's the low end that's popping through, but the top end's gone. And then let's bring it back up front and present. And then I'll push it back in the mix. You know, just by messing with those two parameters, suddenly I've got a pan pot now that I can go backwards and forwards. Because as I said, it's very tricky to sort of get things moving where you want, but hopefully just, you know, using EQ can be such a dramatic thing.
Yeah. I guess people tend to reach for delay and reverb and spatial effects when talking about depth.
Yeah.
But this is obviously more of a psychoacoustic thing.
Yeah, so, you know, I will cover reverb and delays and stuff, but, you know, that's not the answer for everything.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to put things more in the background, rather than going for reverbs all the time, your mix can start sounding a lot cloudy, a lot muddy. So you can pick your moments of what you want to put in reverb, what you want to use, EQs to push things backwards and forwards, and compressors as well. I don't know, I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the kick drum example, but now I'm going to use a compressor to sort of create depth of field as well.
Okay.
A lot of people use compressors, you know, this is how I started using it as well, is using compressors to control dynamic range for stuff. You know, that's one use of a compressor, but a compressor is our most musical tool as an engineer. So we can shape how someone's played something by using compressors. We can obviously control dynamics, but we can also push things backwards and forwards in the mix using compressors. Before I get into this, I'm going to do that random example again. So
Okay.
if you don't mind, back it up.
Fine.
Back
Push
it
me
up.
out of shot.
Yeah. Can we drop the mic a little, please? Okay, so let's try not to mess this up. So me, besides level and frequency content, we're going to work on something else there. So I'm just going to clap. Hopefully it doesn't distort the microphone. Hopefully you can hear this. Don't freak out. I'm not gonna One more. Everyone's going to think I'm weird, but we'll see.
This is what it's like in Ganesh's classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of clapping.
Never know what to expect.
So I guess you're talking about transient.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So what you perceive as me being closer and further away is the transient. You know, as soon as you can hear that top end detail and that crack, you know I'm close to you.
Yeah.
If I'm further away, you won't hear that definition of that transient. So I can push it backwards and forwards in the mix by messing around with the transients. And, you know, you got transient designers that can do that, but my favorite go-to straight away is a compressor, just by pushing things backwards and forwards. Hopefully everyone heard that or knows what I'm talking about, or you might think I'm just an odd little fella, but we'll see how it pans out with this. So I'm just going to compress this really hard. It's an extreme example, but I'm not really worried too much about the sound of it. I just want you to sort of get drawn to what I'm trying to do. I know it's redlining, but whatever. I'm going to go hard with it. So the main thing that we can mess around with for this sort of depth of field thing that we're trying to do is the attack. You know, how does the compressor grab the sound to begin with, and how does that make you feel when you hear it, you know, with a slow attack or a quick attack? So let's try it. We'll go extreme. We'll go this way with it. Maybe too extreme.
Yeah, disappeared.
Just destroy the sound. Yeah. Okay, as I said, it's an extreme example, so I just want you to really focus on the start of the sound. So you're more worried about the front attack of it.
Yeah.
Yeah? So let's go with it. Obviously level and frequencies change, but I'm not really worried about that in this example. I just want you to focus more on the transient. So this sounds like it's in the background, and watch. Obviously level, frequency, that changes, but it's the attack that I'm talking about in this instance. And then I'll push it the other way, go more in the background. Feels a lot more distant. So that's a quick attack. The reason why it's working with a quick attack is because it's grabbing the front of the sound, it's shaping the transient first. As opposed to a slow attack, it allows the front through and then you can control it. So just by me doing this, like, you know, just sort of shut your eyes and just have a listen to it. You're not closing your eyes?
Oh, sorry. I'm listening.
And then I'll creep it forward. And that is not working because it's going to... I don't know what happened there, but... So compressors are like a really powerful tool that I use, you know, for mixing to push things backwards and forwards as well. Besides, you know, dynamically shaping a sound, I can tonally shape how it sounds as well. So I'm using a compressor to almost shape the transient to where I want it to be in the mix. So for example, you know, back to my cool example again, if I've got my vocal, for example, lead vocal there, and I've got backing vocals, I can use a compressor to push them right behind the vocal. Or I can push it right up front by using the attack. Let's actually play some vocals so we can hear it. Let's start off with a dry.
My, what you do to me. Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea.
Now with the backings.
From the very first time we loved. From the very first time we touched. Walking on wires and power lines. You put your body on.
So I'll use a compressor. I'll go extreme with it again so you can all hear it.
My, what you do to me. Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time we loved. From the very first time we touched.
So by me messing with the attack, I can make the backing vocals up front with the lead vocal, or I can give it a little bit of space behind it, just by messing with the attack. So I haven't even messed around with the effects yet. So as I said before, with a slow attack, it's going to feel really up front and present. As soon as I start speeding up that attack, it's going to push it back and back and back. Hopefully this example works.
My, what you do to me. Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea.
A little bit more back, and then...
From the very first time we loved. From the very first time we touched.
Feels more up front with the vocal.
Walking on...
So you can almost think of it as a stage, you know, where do you want to position everything? Like, if you're watching a concert, you know, your lead singer, the band and everything, you can almost place the backing vocals or synths or whatever's going on back in the mix, or you can bring it up front as well. It's an extreme example, but I just
Oh,
focusing on the sound.
what you do to me, like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea.
Then I push it back.
From the very first time we loved,
Now you can actually feel it.
from the very
lot more
first
separated.
time we touched, walking on wires and power lines.
Now more up front.
You put your body on top of mine.
So I know I'm not compressing much, but it's tonally shaping the transients of that sound. It's a cool trick. Like, I think compressors are like a huge topic. A lot of people don't sort of understand what's going on behind compressors, but you know, this is our most musical tool ever. You know, you can actually shape performances and do all the stuff I mentioned before just by using a compressor. It's pretty powerful. So it's good to sort of understand the capabilities of it so you can actually start applying it to your mixes rather than just saying, I'm going to add a compressor just for the sake of adding a compressor. There should be like some reasoning behind why you're doing it. If you want it louder, just turn the volume up. You don't have to add a compressor just for that. You know what I mean? But I'll just quickly demo this again with the kick because it's really easy to demonstrate, and then I'll move on to some other stuff. So really up front. What's up with this thing? Do you reckon this compressor knows I'm jet lagged?
Yes.
It's messing with me, eh?
That's cool.
Okay, so back
There we
in the
go.
mix.
Yes. Bit of a buggy logic there, but yeah,
Yeah.
you get the idea.
Yeah. Okay, let's move
Yes,
on from
let's
that
move
example. Okay, so we've covered EQ and compression, just some simple tools
Yeah.
we have. Now we can start messing around with reverbs.
Yeah. I mean, it's good that we covered EQ and compression first because I think when you talk about depth, people do reach for delay and reverb first.
Yeah.
But they don't have to necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. That's not my go-to straight away. It might be, the EQ compressor just to push it back, and then I can use effects to create even more space and depth in tracks. But yeah, try not to always go for reverbs because, as I said before, if you drown everything in reverb, then the mix gets a little bit messy. Let's do it with the vocal because you guys are probably sick of the kick drum.
Never.
Never! More kick. Okay, so
My, what you do to me.
check this out.
Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time we loved, from the very first time we touched, walking on wires and power lines. You put your body.
We use spaces on it. Spaces on it is really cool. Reverb, which is standard as well, so it's pretty nice to use. But let's try a few different things. So let's go with a medium space hall. 2 seconds. So now you're sort of working on people's perception of spatial sort of environments now. When you walk, from the street inside a building to in a room, you notice things change, like the way things are bouncing off everything, how much sort of space is around sound. As soon as you come into a room, it tightens down. So you walking into a small room compared to a medium room to a larger room, you can push things into different spaces because of that. So you're just messing around with reverb and the way people perceive sound. So if I want to get something into like a huge sort of space, I'm not going to pick a room that's small. I'll pick a room that's very large, and then you've got cathedrals, and then you've got all sorts of stuff from there. So you're just sort of playing on that. Let's go max with this and just try it out.
My, what you do to me. Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time we loved, from the very
So
first
try.
time we touched, walking on wires and power lines. You put your body on top of mine.
I mean, I hope everyone can sort of hear that example, but, if you want something really present, you don't have much reverb on it, or you have a really short decay time on it. The longer the decay time, the further it feels from you. So if you want a really upfront vocal, like an MC, for example, you want that shit to be really, you want that to be really, really up front, right? So you want to go for either no reverb or a very short reverb tail. As soon as I start extending that out, I'm pushing that person back in the mix. So just remember, if you want to dry things up, it actually brings it a lot more forward. So you need to pick your reverb moments.
Yeah.
Let's go with a large space. Same thing, hall. Prison main floor. Let's give that a shot. That sounds interesting.
Ominous. Yeah.
My, what you do to me, like lightning when
Like a
I'm
tiled
swimming
kind of
in the
sound.
sea. From the very first time
Good sounding
we
prison.
loved, from the very first time we touched,
So without it,
walking on wires and
feels a lot more
power
up front.
lines. You put your body
And
on
then I can
top
push
of
it back
mine. Every time that you lift me
just by using the
up
reverb.
Yeah.
to the heaven and stars above.
I mean, it's a pretty obvious one. You know, everyone, as you said, will go to a reverb first. But what you can do in your mix is not just use a standard reverb for all sounds, but you pick different reverb sounds that you want for different elements. So maybe a synth you might send to a nice, small, tight hall or something. Maybe your strings you want it in a cathedral. It gives you a little bit more of a spatial sort of environment. Maybe your snare you want to use a gated plate, or vocal you want to use a plate or whatever, not, you know. So besides the reverb tail, you got the reverb tones as well that you can mess around with. So, because I'm probably sick of this Wi-Fi diagram, but you know, you can go from here all the way back just by using different spaces as well. So maybe this track, let's just have a quick listen.
What you do to me, like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time we loved.
So maybe it's a stem, but you can sort of hear there's a bit of a guitar coming through.
It's like a spring reverb.
Yeah, that spring. Maybe that sound, I want to push it back all the way to zone 6 or zone 5. I might use a cathedral that will give you that illusion that it's in a further space. But the vocal, maybe I might use a nice tight plate reverb that makes it feel up front, but it still has a little bit of depth. So in that example, maybe the vocal's up, you know, 1, and then the reverb's pushing it back here. That crazy spring guitar is back here somewhere, you know, and just shaping different things. I think it's a powerful tool, and you need to start exploring the different types of reverbs that you can use and what it does to sound as well. You know, certain strings sound better with certain types of reverbs, or a snare, or a vocal. You just need to sort of know when to use things. It's just about training your ears, really, just to see where you can push things. But, you know, a good way of practicing is just have one instrument and then just chuck it through a lot of different reverbs and just see the differences, because you need to actually hear what's going on. And then beyond that, and I hope this is like, all right.
My, what you do to me.
Beyond that, you can actually EQ the reverb to push it into a further space as well.
From the very first time we loved.
So back to our first example with EQ, by messing with the top end and low end, you can push things backwards and forwards. So now you've got your reverb that's giving you space, but I can also push that reverb backwards and forwards by messing with the EQ of it.
Independent of the original vocal.
Yeah. So I can keep my vocal here, but I can make that reverb go further backwards and forwards as well, tapping into those zones.
My, what you do to me, like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea.
And then back.
From the very first time we loved, from the very first time we touched,
And then push it back again.
walking on wires and power lines. You put your body on top of mine. Every time that you lift me.
Yeah, so with more low end content, you feel it going further away, and then you can suck it in by taking the bottom end out. Same thing with the top end, you know, you can cut the top end out or whatnot. Me personally, for digital reverbs, I don't like the top end. I think it's very synthetic sounding, so I cut that shit out anyway. But the bottom end you can mess around with as well. Yeah, I EQ effects a lot, so I think it's a good way of placing things in a mix without the effects taking over.
Yeah.
As well.
And in terms of pre-delay, is that something you consider when you're placing
Yeah. So the more pre-delay, it's the more bounces you hear within that reverb. So if you have a higher pre-delay, it almost puts it in a bigger space because it's bouncing around everywhere. So the tighter the pre-delay, the closer it feels. So as soon as you start pushing that out, you hear a lot more things bouncing backwards and forwards. And then it makes it feel like it's in a bigger space as well. Which is sort of playing on, you being in a canyon, for example, where you hear a lot of echoes, but it's all mixed into that reverb sound. Mm-hmm. So the further the space for the echoes, the bigger the space feels. So if you go, hey, hey, hey.
Good example.
I don't know what happened there, but you can sort of feel it like a lot more. It's happening.
Right, we'll get through.
We'll get through it.
You can go to bed after this.
Yeah. The further the spacing for the echoes, the bigger the space it feels.
Yeah.
The tighter in, the smaller the space is. Okay. Got a bit weird there for a second.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's all right. That's how we roll here, eh?
It's all right. There's only a couple of hundred people watching. It's fine.
Yeah. No pressure. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that? What do you...
I think it's nice to bring in the EQ aspect to the reverb because I think that's a really important part. It's just shaping the sound. The reverb is as important as the original sound in terms of spacing.
Yeah, for sure. It's a cool thing. I think you just got to try exploring that a little bit more. Next thing, going back to that crazy canyon example that I did, we're going to mess around with some delays now. So let's pick a stereo delay to give you some cool feel. Sorry, just name tracks as I have it. Okay, so we can use delay to create depth as well by pushing things backwards and forwards, but you can also use delays to push things wider as well. So, I think you've seen that example enough, but you can sort of push things, from this point all the way out using delays as well. Yeah. So it's a different sort of feel from using reverbs. Let's go and send some vocals to this. Let's go 16th.
When I'm swimming in the sea, from the very first time we loved, from the very first time we touched.
Without it?
Walking on wires
really
and
upfront.
power lines. You put your body on top of mine. Every time that you lift me up
effect, right?
to the heaven and stars.
The thing is with delays, using a 16th note to an 8th note to a quarter note to half notes, you can actually make things feel a lot more away from you, further away or closer in, just by messing with the delay times as well. So using a 16th note, because it bounces a lot more quickly, you feel it like it's a lot more closer. Mm-hmm. As soon as I start pulling the timing off to go to 8th notes, to quarter notes, to half notes, you start hearing the distinct repeats, and it makes you feel like you're further away from something. So let's go from 16th to 8th, and you can sort of feel it.
Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea, from the very first time we loved.
You can hear the echoes a little bit more. Back to 16ths.
Walking on wires and power lines. You put your
because it bounces a lot more quickly, you can feel it up. It's a little bit more up front. Eights.
What you do to me.
Quarter.
Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time
like in a far place, right?
Yeah.
From the very
and then
first time
half note.
Walking on wires and power lines. You put your body on top of my...
Because the spacing of the reverb time is a lot different and stretched out from the original sound source, you feel like it's in a distant place.
Yeah.
So just by me messing with delay times, by pushing them backwards and forwards, I can mess around with the zones. I can go from zone 1 to zone 5, for example, just by messing around with that. So it's another cool trick that you could use.
Yeah, and I guess the filtering and EQing comes into play there as well.
Yeah, you can do the same shit with the EQ and stuff like that as well. Sorry, I'm saying...
That's all right.
Saying shit.
I noticed.
Yeah, just by messing with that and the EQ, same thing like the reverb, you got different spatial aspects, and once you bring the reverb, the EQ into it, you can go further with that as well.
Yeah.
You know, and you can also use compression to further push the delay backwards and forwards as well. So it really depends what you want to get into. One thing that I want to get into today before we run out of time is to how to access zone 6, which is the sort of special zone, which is the one really far back. So the thing is, compression, EQ, reverbs and delays only get you so far. But how do you get behind all that stuff? That's a tricky thing. You need to use a combination of things. So I'm just going to create it now with you guys.
We will get to questions, by the way, coming very soon. I know there's plenty of questions coming in, so we'll
Okay.
try and get through them all.
Right, I'll try to be a little bit quick with this one. So zone 6. So what I want to do is use a combination of things. So I want to use a combination of a delay into a reverb. So the thing with this is it's going to work a lot differently than just having a standard reverb or delay.
Yeah.
Let's just build this up and then I can pull it apart for you guys. Okay, so let's get into zone 5 or zone 4 area, just using 8th note.
My, what you do to me.
Feels a little bit back.
Lightning when I'm swimming in the sea. From the very first time we loved.
Now let's kick it up a notch. So let's go with our reverb, but let's use a medium whole. I want something like a 3-second thing. Long reverb.
Sounds about right.
Get away from the prison and get to long reverb. And then I'm going to increase the level. So a couple of things going on. So it's going into the delay and then into the reverb. So it trickles the reverb a lot differently.
My, what you do to me. Like lightning when I'm swimming in the sea.
Without the reverb,
From the very first time we loved.
feels like it's in zone
From
4,
the very
5,
first
and then I'll
time
push that
we
all the way back.
touched. Walking on wires and power lines.
Extreme example.
Yeah.
You put your body.
I'd rather show you extreme than subtle stuff so everyone can hear it. The thing is, if I didn't have the delay trickling into the reverb works totally differently.
My, what you do to me.
Just straight. Because the lead vocal just triggers it once and then it plays off that. But if I actually add a delay before the reverb, the delay is moving. So it's not just hit off. It'll hit and then keep hitting. Then that will trickle the reverb to work a lot differently. So it's a different way of working.
My, what you
Let's add the
do to
delay.
me. Like lightning. My, what.
Can you feel that sort of bounce? Let me go a little bit. Let me drag this back a bit so you can hear it a bit more.
My, what. My.
I don't know, am I being a bit awkward right now? It's like, can you hear this? Can you hear this? So the idea for this is you get the reverb to work a lot differently in the mix, so you can push things like a lot, in the background. So there might be certain things like that guitar thing that I was talking about that you can push all the way in the background by having a delay just triggering the reverb.
Yeah.
So when I mix, I've got different types of reverbs from small, medium, large. Then I have different types of delay, 16ths, 8ths, quarters. Then I'll have some zone 6s, which will be the delay into the reverb. But then you could have 16th notes triggering the reverb, or you could do 8th notes triggering the reverb. So you can access the zones whenever you want. So as soon as you get inspired, you go, you know what, I'm going to throw this in zone 6 or zone 5 or whatever not. You can just do it straight away. So I have like a mixing template ready to go. Is that 5? I think.
Yeah, that's 5. Yeah. And I was just thinking,
Made it.
what's really good about it is that we didn't even touch on panning, which I kind of like, in terms of the fact that depth
Yeah.
Like we haven't even discussed the stereo field really. I mean, obviously there's stereo effects, but
Yeah, maybe I
in
should
terms
have
of-
put that as
No, I think it's good because I think getting people's head, don't go straight for the pan, reverb and delay. There's so much more to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's really important. And there's much more in the courses, of course.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
We got plenty of questions coming in. One
Be
that I
gentle,
noticed.
guys. Be gentle.
It was Jalen XO is asking, who is the female singer?
So
Great
this is
voice.
a session singer that we got in for the course. So with sound engineering, we have to recreate a song. So we do drums, bass, guitars, and vocals. So this was the session singer that came in. Really
Right.
cool, yeah. One of the favorite ones I've worked with.
Cool. Len Gott's asking about insert and send effects. I guess we're using all auxiliaries in this example. Would there ever be a situation in terms of creating depth where you put the reverb on the sound as an insert?
It depends how much control you want. Like if you put a reverb and delay directly over the original sound, then you lose the parameters to mess around with that unique sound. So like a lead vocal, I will never put the reverb and delay directly over a lead vocal. I will
Right.
have sends from that. So I can push and pull things in terms of the lead because it's all on sends. But if the reverb was directly over that lead vocal, I can't mess around with it too much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sort of stuck in the sound. So I'm trying to keep it flexible. So I have the lead and then send a lot of stuff from that. And then I can just push and pull things. But then, you know, I've done stuff where certain elements, I just put a reverb straight over it because I want that sound. And then I'll go from there. So it just depends how much of a control freak you are with the mixes.
So, Mr. Eklazu's asking, if you're producing a record for a club system, how can you create a stereo space but still make it sound good on a mono when it's summed to mono? I mean, all of these effects are obviously mono compatible, but is there anything in terms of we want to look out for in terms of mono summing with these effects?
Yeah, I mean, just collapse it down to mono and see what you lose and what gets added, and then sort of attend to it that way. To be honest, I don't check too much in mono anymore.
Right.
Just because, you know, a lot of stuff is stereo compatible, but back in the day, you know, a lot of it is mono where it collapses down. So, you know, I do check it once in a while, but I'm not always checking it. In terms of clubs as well, you got to know where your track could be played. If you're being played in a stadium, obviously that stadium is going to add, you know, its own reverb tail to the sound. So the more wet you make sounds, the wetter you make sounds, when you get into a space that's going to add extra reverb and tail, sometimes it's a little bit too much. So if you're playing stuff that you know is going to be in a club, try to mix it with a club environment in mind. Or if you're mixing something that, you know, people will listen to more on headphones or whatever, not try to keep that in mind. It's a bit tricky to know where your stuff's going to be played, but it's a compromise, you know.
Totally.
So you got to be careful of where you want to put it.
Yeah, Doug HD, this is a favourite technique of mine, Doug. I'm on your page here. How do you feel about sidechaining the reverb to the dry signal to get more space? So sidechaining the reverb as in using the actual sound as a key for the sidechain.
I do that a lot for more creative effects. I do that with like reverbs and delays. So for this Zone 6 example, I could try something a little bit crazy for the snare. So every time the snare hits, the reverb ducks, and then when the snare goes, the reverb comes back out. So you could do some wild stuff like that. But yeah, that's a really cool trick to try as well. Sometimes I'll do some weird stuff with the vocals where I'll have a delay feeding into the amp simulator, for example, to give it like a bit of an old school vibe, then a reverb. And then I'll just gate or sidechain the delay. So every time the vocal hits, it goes back. And then when the vocal sort of pulls back, the reverb delay comes in as well.
Yeah, best of both worlds.
Yeah, so you get some cool stuff, you know, happening with that.
Yeah. All right, we got time for one more question from Amyed B. How do you choose a type of reverb for vocals? Does it depend on the recording room or the music?
Depends on the music and the space you want to create. If you want to put something, if you got a lot more space in the track, like you're doing a ballad, your reverbs can be a little bit more in-depth and a little bit longer. But if you're doing a song where you have a lot of elements going on and the tempo is pretty quick, then you're sort of limited with how far or how long the decay time can be. So you got to really pick your moments with that. And then in terms of tone, just mess around with the presets, see what works, for the track. As I said before, my go-to for leads is like plates. I just think it's a really cool sound.
Yeah.
But then my backing vocals, I might put it in a hall or a nice room or something like that, So it's just trial and error, really.
Cool.
Just keep messing around with it till it sounds
Yeah.
half decent, and then you're sort of onto a good spot.
Nice one. There is one more question I just saw from Renby, which is it a good idea to cut the sub from your kick to make room for a separate sub bass? That's a completely different off-topic question, but still a good one.
Yeah. The thing is, you need to pick who wins that low-end battle.
Yeah.
It's either the kick or bass. They both can't really go down there, so you need to sort of do something a little bit different. So what I tend to do, if we're just focusing on that kick drum example, is I'll have my original kick drum, I'll gut all the low-end like sub-frequencies from maybe, 80 hertz under, and then I'll have a few duplicates of that kick drum that I'll treat differently. One for attack, one for sub, one for punch. So I gut everything else out besides the sub track under 80 hertz, and then I just have the sub track working there. And then I compress that sub track so it's nice and controlled, and it doesn't really affect anything else. So I'm not compromising my kick sound by using a harder compression setting on the sub. I can actually have interplay with both of them.
That sounds like another FFL we can do at another time. But unfortunately today we are out of time. Hopefully you got plenty of inspiration for the weekend. But if you're thirsty for much more music making and production techniques, make sure you check out our courses at pointblanklondon.com. We'll be back next week for another FFL, so we'll see you then. Cheers.